This is the tentative schedule. The first week, well, today and next week, we'll do some really basic setup of learning about HTML, CSS, some very common style sheets such as Bootstrap. We'll talk about responsive design as the importance of that most traffic today is either on phones or tablets and small screens. So certainly whatever application you're building has to be built around the audience that is mostly going to be consuming your content. So a lot of in the front end part, and it's we will use the assignment as a guide. We'll get you started with the assignment. I will share all the source code that we're going to be developing here together in class. I'll put it on GitHub. You're free to use whatever I provide here in class that we work on together. You're free to reuse that as a starting spot. The the third week, we'll introduce JavaScript. There's some description on the first assignment that might look like we're asking you to do something dynamic. Since we haven't seen JavaScript yet in the first assignment, then no, it should not be dynamic. The first assignment is completely static, right? It's just HTML, CSS. You're free to start playing around with JavaScript, especially if you're very comfortable with that. But it's not required in the first assignment. The second assignment is going to take the what you worked on in the first assignment, and you're going to add some dynamic behaviors, right? We're going to introduce JavaScript ES6. We'll introduce Jquery, being one of the more common libraries. Today is very when you're rendering dynamic content on the browser, it's very uncommon that you do it with raw JavaScript. Usually you do it with some kind of abstraction. JQuery is one of the more common libraries still today that allows you to manipulate the DOM in its raw format. So jQuery will be our first introduction of an abstraction layer where we don't interact directly with the raw browser. Instead, we have some library that creates a virtual browser for us, right? So it'll be it's a very thin abstraction layer, but very useful. We'll then start looking at an even higher abstraction. We'll talk about React.js that allows us to think about building web applications in terms of components, right? So a lot of the things that you might expect in Java or other mature languages, strongly typed languages, of building large applications in terms of smaller components and then building them together to build even more complex ones. React.js introduces us to that nature, right, of that idea. We'll introduce several design patterns and best practices, which are part of the component of thinking about implementing things in terms of components. At this point we'll introduce a solution that React.js provides us to maintain state on the client side, on the UI, and we'll see that it's somewhat awkward of how to maintain the actual data that you're manipulating on the UI, and we'll talk about its pros and cons, and then we'll introduce on the fifth week we'll introduce Redux as a means, a better way of maintaining state on the client side. Right, we'll say, well, all that drudgery that you had to go through using plain old React.js. Well, here's an alternative way of doing it. Right, here we'll use Redux as a means to maintain data manipulation on the client. Then we'll talk about we'll start expanding and say, well, all this data that you've been manipulating on the client, that's all that data is not being stored anywhere, right? When you refresh the application, everything's gone. Even if you've added anything, deleted or anything, even though the UI is responding and dynamically re-rendering, none of that is being stored permanently anywhere. So we'll introduce access to the server. We'll build a simple Java set of controllers and RESTful web services where the client is going to be able to post any state changes on the client. It'll post them over to the server, so the server can then maintain that state on the server, right? So that even if you've refreshed the client, it can always go back to the server to retrieve the current state of the application and then re-render itself. There's the no class Columbus Day on Monday. We'll have that midterm right on that Thursday. and then we will come back after that midterm. We'll come back to this issue of state management, right? We've maintained state on the server. The client can refresh and go and fetch the state on the server, but the server is maintaining state only on the server's RAM, right? In the CPU's memory, right? In the memory of the computer. If you restart the server, all that is gone. It disappears. So we'll introduce a persistent data to relational databases through the use of Java persistence API, and we'll use relational database MySQL. If you feel comfortable with other vendors, feel free to use those other vendors. We're going to use the use of object relational mapping. If you've done 3200, a lot of perhaps some of those techniques you'll find them familiar. Anybody take 3200? All right, great. So if you've done some data access, then that will help you. It's not required. Everything that you need will be provided for you. Plenty of examples, plenty of starting code that should get you going. All right, and all of these, right? All the assignments, A1, 2, 3, 4, all these assignments, we're gonna get you started here in class, right? And obviously we won't do the entire assignment here in class, but we'll share that source code and we'll push it to GitHub. Please pester me if I haven't shared the latest code that we made. I'll try to make that available as soon as possible. But if I haven't, feel free to pester me to make that available. And you can freely use that content as a starting point for your own assignment. Okay, and we'll keep track of what if we do find similarities in the source code. Obviously, if it's my source code, then obviously it'll be the same for everybody. But certainly, what was left over should be your own, right? Your own content. All right, so yeah, we'll do some relational database there. So up to this point, we'll be done with the first half of the project, right? The faculty-facing side of the project that we're working together. Yes, we're going to abandon that for a little bit, and we're going to introduce another infrastructure. We'll use what is referred to as the mean stack, right? Where you have Mongo as the database, Express and Node.js as in the middle tier, and then Angular in the front end. Okay, we'll first start with Angular. Revisit the concept of single page applications, which you will be already familiar with that since we've done React.js. React.js has a much shallower learning curve. It's fairly easy to pick up React.js, introduces you to component technology, single page application routing, all this, right? All these concepts are fairly easy to pick up in React. Angular has a steeper learning curve that hopefully by the time you get here and you already understand what the single page application is, you already understand what the component is, and you already know what routing is, right? Hopefully that steep learning curve will be a little shallower, okay? Because you already understand all these concepts, right? It's just more of a little more rigorous. Angular is just a little more opinionated on how things should be built. React is a little more loose on how you want to go about building things. But Angular is very strict about how things should be done. So some folks don't prefer React over Angular. I don't really care. We'll also introduce Node.js after that as the middle tier, right? And again, a lot of the same concepts that we introduced earlier, implementing controllers and RESTful services using Java, right? We'll revisit here how to build that using Node.js, right? We'll build controllers and RESTful services, but using JavaScript running on a Node.js server. No class on Veterans Day. We'll revisit persistent data, but to a non-relational database. We'll use MongoDB for persisting data that students are submitting, assignments or quizzes and whatnot. We'll store it here in MongoDB. Hopefully, we'll get a chance to look at Vue a little earlier, and we'll build also some of the front end. We'll see how we can integrate Vue.js as an alternative, mechanism for dynamically rendering content on the client. That puts us more or less at Thanksgiving. The last week or so when we come back Thanksgiving, we'll probably maybe do a little more Vue.js. But I wanted to leave it open somewhat for helping folks, finish up the project. By this time, I would hope that you're almost done with your project, right? That you're just tweaking it, you're doing some QA, right? You're finishing up a couple of things here and there, tying up some loose ends, but here the TAs and myself will be available if you need help, and we'll all come here together and we'll do Scrum and we'll do peer programming and help you out. Okay. The last day of class is the 4th, December 4th, and the week after that we'll do the final exam. Okay, in the finals week. All right. Okay. Any questions? Yes. No. I think it's still pointing to the summer Piazza. Yeah, I gotta change that.